I guess so. I was just going to ask all the theists, so I guess particularly the Christians in the room, why does sin exist?
Well,
What is sin and why does it exist?
sin is absence of love, like anything that's not from love.
So when I wake up in the morning, is that, I mean, that there's no love involved with that. It's just like a thing that happens. It's chemical processes in the brain. Is that a sin?
No, but it depends the way you wake up, because you can wake up with your being full of love, or you could wake up with your being lacking love.
Well, but what would be lacking in love? What if I just woke up and just felt normal? I wasn't happy, but I wasn't sad. I mean,
Yeah. Well, we're kind of in a weird state of affairs right now because of the corruption that's in the world. So I wouldn't say you're doing a sinful action by waking up, but you have awakened in a corrupt world. So, there is a lack of love in the world that we live in.
so what is a sinful action? What would a sinful action look like or be like?
Anything that is not acting out of love for God and neighbor.
So yeah, but like, so when I take a shower, I'm not doing that like out of love of anything. I'm just taking a shower. So is that,
Yeah, that's not sinful.
but but it would be under your definition. I mean, there's an absence of love there. It's just a thing that we do, or when I'm brushing my teeth. I feel like sin is something a little bit more
Yeah, that's too
than that.
nebulous. I think in fundamentalism we always said it was a transgression of the law of Moses.
Okay.
Sin is the going against the nature of God.
There you go. That would also qualify, I think.
Yeah, sin is missing the goal or missing the target. It means that God created us for a specific purpose, and He gave us free will, so we can choose to follow His will or not. And as Rebekah rightly said, the first commandment is to love God, first of all, and then to love our next. And when we don't do that, then we miss the target.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying God's will ultimately not be done because people are going against it?
Yeah,
Well,
you'd have to conclude that.
Yeah, I would think so.
Well, I would say that God's will was to create a world where there would be humans with free will, which could
yes.
choose to do
Exactly.
right and wrong. To give us
When
that
you say right
freedom.
and wrong, what exactly do you mean?
As I said, God, He made us with a purpose, with the goal, and with the target, and we can either do His will and go upon the purpose that He made us for, or we can choose not to do that. And when we don't do that, then we choose to do things upon what we want, what we think is right, and we should do. And in many cases, it is doing evil. I mean, the Ten Commandments.
So what you're saying is what's right, what's morally good is doing what we should do, doing what we ought to do.
Yeah, we have first we have our conscience, which says that certain actions are wrong, and we have the commandments in the Old Testament, especially the Ten Commandments. And the first one, which is the foremost, which is to love God and to love our next.
So you agree that
do believers sin?
Excuse me?
Yes.
Do you sin?
We all sin. The Bible is clear in Romans 3. He says that
right. So
we all have fallen and don't achieve the perfection that God requires from us.
I know what the Bible says. So what difference does it make if you believe in God or not? Because that's my problem. I don't see any difference if I believe in God or not. You sin even though you believe. So,
let me explain to you.
And tomorrow the sun's going to come up, and I don't believe and you believe, but the sun's still going to come up tomorrow. And there's good and bad people on both sides. And I'm still wondering, and I've asked Rebekah, I think before, what difference would it make if I was a believer? What would change?
I had for a long time, for many years, I didn't understand how can I be punished for the fact that I descend from Adam and Eve. They did fall. It wasn't me. and it wasn't my choice to be born as a human and receiving that fallen nature. And I struggled with that. And then someone told me, you can see it like that. You have been born in a team. It's like a football team. And in that team, one of the 11 players makes a foul. And the arbiter, he punishes the entire team because of one of the team made that foul. And now it is the other
but that's only on
situation.
a team sport. That's not.
Yeah,
in
and
all
now
sports.
it is, and then there is the second Adam, which is Jesus, and he didn't fall. He lived a perfect life, and when we change the team, then his righteousness is attributed to all of those which belong to that new team. So when we move camp, when we move team, then the first Adam, his sin was attributed to all of us. But the second Adam, which is Jesus, his righteousness is attributed to all of those which change team and that belong to Jesus.
Does any of that apply to now, or are you only applying things to the afterlife?
No, I regard myself and all those which believe in Jesus that they did move camp from the camp without God to the camp with God, to which they belong. They changed family. Before you were in the family without God, and you changed to a family which are all those which are saved. And I am not saved, and I'm not saved because I did certain things right, because I am a sinner, but I am saved because I changed team, and the righteousness of Jesus has been attributed to me.
Would you say you changed what?
Team, like a football team.
And that's not an action?
Yes, I made a decision to change camp, right? So
you did something. You said you didn't do anything to get salvation, but you did do something.
Yes, I didn't do something in the sense of doing good deeds, but
it's not good to choose God?
Well, I made a decision. I think it is part, right? So
yeah, this is what I always.
I know where you want to go with Arminianism and Calvinism, and of course,
this is a plot hole in Christianity.
Yeah,
what is the plot hole? I don't understand this.
Well, what Otangelo is saying is that he's saved by through grace by faith, right? And he's done nothing good. Like there's nothing that he did to get salvation. And then he's describing how he made a decision and changed teams. Well, that's something. And not only is that something, but that's a good something.
Yes.
So
I agree.
You ought to boast, Otangelo, for the good thing you did.
Pine Creek, I say that I took this decision because God, he promoted it to happen, So
so that's the most important thing. It wasn't free.
Speaking of good, Rebekah, would it be possible? I don't want to dominate the room, but I was trying to run down a line of logic with Otangelo. Would it be possible if I got back to that?
Yeah, go for it.
Otangelo, what I wanted to ask was, you agree then that we can define good as that which we ought do, or that which ought be permitted, that which we have most reason to do? Does that jive with you?
Yes, I think it. I mean, God, He gives the oath to bees, and He gives them through our conscience, which is in us, and through the commandments in the Bible.
Okay. So I take it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would take it then that you would agree that evil would just be what we ought not do, what we have most reason not to do, what ought not be permitted.
Sure.
So
it is missing the target. It is missing the point, the goal that God has set for us.
Right on. Is God reasonable? Does God reason? Does he use reason when he makes his decision? Does he accord with the rules of inference and logic?
Well, if we can do it, I guess that the one which created us, of course, has much more that capacity, right?
Okay. Would you say that if God is omniscient and omnipotent, then he's also essentially like maximally rational and maximally reasonable as well, correct? Maximally wise, all that stuff.
It's a trap.
Absolutely.
So why does evil exist?
Evil exists because God, he didn't want to create a world of just robots which are pre-programmed to exactly do what he wants to do. It would be always right us. But he wanted to create free beings which can choose if they want to do right and wrong, because they can also exercise love. And love cannot exist if there is no free will.
So they can
Could it
spend
also be
eternity
God's
with
nature?
it.
Hold on here.
So they can spend eternity.
So are you saying that it's not possible for there to be a world which possesses rational moral agents who possess free will, and in which none of those agents ever choose to do evil?
I know where you want to go with this, Leo, and the question would be, in heaven, will we have?
No, that's not where I'm going.
Okay.
I'll say I think it's possible that it's possible
to have a world in which rational moral agents possess free will, and
Yes.
there exists no evil.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say it's possible too. I don't see the contradiction. I'm just wondering if Otangelo thinks it's possible.
Well, if Adam and Eve would have chosen not to eat the forbidden fruit, then it could have eventually gone on without being a fallen world, without sin in the world. Right?
So it is possible for there to be a world with rational moral agents who possess free will, and there exists no evil.
Yeah, they would choose only to do good.
So why is that not the world which exists?
Well, because Adam and Eve, they didn't choose to obey God.
Yeah, but why would God create a world where they would disobey him? It seems like if God is going to create a world, if God is like maximally rational, God always does what he has most reason to do. And so it seems that if any form of evil exists, God didn't do what he had most reason to do, because it's entirely possible for there to have been a world where there are rational moral agents who do possess free will, but there is no evil. So then the question is, God has most reason to instantiate that world, so why is that not the world which exists?
I guess he instantiated the world where he knew that evil would come to the world, so he could display his love and his power of redemption and grace.
It's not possible to do that in a world without evil?
Well, then there would be nothing to save, right?
The important
why
thing
would
was
something
the
need to be
possibility.
saved?
The important part was the possibility of being able to do something outside of God's will, right? If no possibility exists for people to do things that are outside of God's will, then everything
But you've already granted that there exists a possible world where there are rational moral agents who possess free will, and yet none of them choose to do evil. So we both agree that the possibility for such a world exists. Now I'm asking you, why doesn't it? It seems that if God always acts in accord with reason, and that's the most reasonable world. Why not? Why would God have created a world where things that ought not occur?
Leo's
that
cheating.
Seems like what God is doing is God instantiated a world that he ought not instantiate, and then thereby God does not always act in accord with his reason. So then God is not omniscient. God is not omnipotent.
I think Leo's cheating by assuming his sinful world is the more reasonable one. I don't know why Leo's version would be more reasonable than what we have now.
I don't know what you're talking about.
What makes one more reasonable than the other?
What makes one more reasonable than what?
What is your
Leo, you want to say that a world where sin would not have
Okay, I can't hear two people talking at once. Orge, what is what more
your
reasonable
hypothetical world you just gave? I can't remember the exact phrasing. Where like no one sins or whatever.
Because sin is what we ought not do. That's why.
Why is that more reasonable than the world we have now?
Because sin is evil, and evil is what we have most reason not to do. Good is what we have most reason to do. So if God always acts in accord with reason, then there's one of two things is true. Either there is no evil, or God does not exist. Evil is what we ought not do. Why would God create a world where things ought not to occur? If that's true, then God is not acting in accord with reason. He wouldn't be a maximally reasonable agent.
Leo,
he would lose two of the omnis and he ceases to be God.
Where would free will fit in this world? Just strictly out of curiosity.
The fact that it's possible for there to have been a world in which there are rational moral agents who possess free will, yet there exists no evil, and we've all agreed such a world is possible. Well, since that's the world where the only things which occur are what ought occur, then, and God only does what he ought do, he's maximally reasonable. He only instantiates the world that he has the most reason to instantiate, then that would be it.
And the reason for that is because, well, think about this: if we are, if the world reflects God's nature, and we're both good and evil, we have good and evil natures within us. That stands to reason that God has both good and evil natures, and this is reflected in Scripture. God is described both as light, and he's also described as dwelling in the thick darkness.
Well, God is not, it's only light. He is not evil or sinful or in darkness whatsoever. But to respond to Leo, I think that God brought out a greater good by permitting evil to come into the world by executing his plan of salvation.
And so then everything that occurs in the world ultimately conduces God's ultimate will and his desire, right?
Yes.
Okay, well then that's just to say that everything that happens and everything that occurs is the best thing to occur. It's what ought occur because it conduces God's will and desires. And then if everything which occurs is what ought to occur, then it's just not evil. So you're conceding that there is no evil in the world. You're conceding there is no possible way to improve the world morally over how it is right now. I just disagree with that.
Okay, Rebekah, can you answer to what I said? I think that, of course, God is against evil, against sin. He doesn't will that we sin, but he did permit the world where sin could enter, because then he could also display his power of redemption and grace and love.
Yeah, so that's the world that God ought to have instantiated, right? That is the world God ought have instantiated because of the reasons God had for instantiating it. Correct?
If they didn't eat the fruit, then none of that would have. Then there's no evil comes into the world, right? So it had to happen.
God knew that it would happen as soon as he would create the world.
The plan was to bring evil into the world.
Yeah. Why would he permit a world in which there's evil? That just seems...
I explained it, Leo, and I explained it twice.
You just appealed to free will. But we both agreed that it's possible to have a world in which there exists rational agents with free will, yet there exists no evil. And so we then come back to the question, why does that world not exist?
I want to answer this now. Look, I'm putting up, this is my cat, Mr. Nice Kitty. Now, look, I get so much pleasure from my cat, okay? And so, partially it's because he's cute, but it's also partially because he's so sweet and nice. And you know what? He has options. You know, he could, scratch my face. He could do all kinds of things that are not nice, right? Now, I could, would I make Mr. Nice Kitty conform so that he never had the possibility of, scratching me to pieces? No, I would not make that, because how can I see, it's so wonderful that he has the choice, right, to be mean or be nice. And it's
we already agreed, though, that there's a possible world, that it's possible to have a world in which there are rational moral agents who possess free will, meaning they do have that option, and yet there still exists no evil. So
maybe we're talking past each other. Let me explain what I meant when I said yes to that question. Okay. What I meant is it's possible that God created everyone with free will, meaning, and by free will, I mean the ability to choose whether to do God's will or choose to do something that is not God's will.
Just quick interjectory question. Ought we do God's will?
Yes.
Okay. Continue.
Okay. But so God set it up so that we could choose to do his will or not his will. And that necessitates that we have to be able to make that choice. You asked, can it exist that we have free will and a world where nobody does evil? Yes, that is possible. If no human beings chose to do evil, then we would have a world with no evil. We would have a world where all beings are freely choosing to do God's will all the time. But that's not the world we live in, because human beings don't.
Why don't we live in that world?
Because human beings don't choose it.
Why not? Why don't? Well, hold on here. Why don't humans choose it? Why would God create a world with rational moral agents?
That's up to
them. So God wanted a world where agents could choose that.
Yes.
Okay, God, so then we ought to have a world. So then we ought to have a world where agents can choose to go against God, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, then I don't understand how going against God is evil. The world ought to be that way. It ought to be done. So then there's no evil in the world.
Checkmate.
All right.
And this is why they call it the logical problem of evil.
Leo, that's a good
Either there's no evil or God doesn't exist. The free will theodicy doesn't get you out of this. And the oh Lord, what's the other one? Or the skeptical theism theodicy doesn't get, because if we can grant that there's a world, the free will theodicy doesn't work, because we can grant that there's a world where it's logically possible for there to be rational or moral agents who possess free will, and yet there's no evil. And God, acting in accord with his reason, would instantiate such a world. So why doesn't that world exist? Well, because either God doesn't have the power to do it, which would mean he's not omnipotent and he isn't God, or he loses some property and ceases to be godlike, and then the conclusion is that God doesn't exist. Or people will say, well, God permits these evils because ultimately everything, they conduce to some greater good. They allow for some greater good to happen. Well, then that's just to say that that previous evil ought to have occurred because it conduces some greater good, in which case if it's what ought to have occurred, if it was the best thing to have occurred, then it's just not an evil action. And then there's just no evil in the world.
Rebekah, do you think that after the judgment, whatever heaven is going to be like will be a world in which there is no desire or possibility to sin?
I think there's a couple of possibilities. The one I lean toward is that when we get to the kingdom of God, we will have fully realized how awful sin is, and we won't want to do it. And we have been truly transformed, to be in the image of Christ in his righteousness and holiness. So I wouldn't go as far as to say we will no longer have free will, but like I said, I leave open the possibility that that's true, because it's possible that our free will time is right now. And, at that time, we will have made our choice about where we're going to be. But the possibility that I think the most strongly is that we will still have free will. It's just we will all have thoroughly realized how awful sin is.
Can I say
Are you talking about in heaven, Rebekah?
Yeah.
In heaven.
Why would God have not just created that world now?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too, but I was also going to say that one of the problems I have with your answer, Rebekah, is that you said that God has transformed us so we won't have that desire to sin, right? Yes. And then that leads to Leo's question, why not just create people with that desire to begin with?
Right. Yeah.
Well, Rebekah, you've really boxed yourself in a corner, Rebekah, when you said that there's no punishment.
Look, okay.
She answered to that.
You can win the argument and I'll still be right. Okay.
But, no. I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm trying to show a conceptual issue with classical Christian theism.
I like your answer.
If God exists, evil does not exist. Evil exists. Therefore, God does not exist. And I don't think that anybody in the professional literature or otherwise has provided a meaningful objection to the logical problem of evil.
Okay, Leo, I answered to that objection twice already, and I think you didn't understand it. If God would have created a world where never there was evil, he couldn't display his love and his grace.
Yeah, all you're saying is that the world where there's evil, so God can display his love and his grace, is the world which God ought to have created. That he had most reason to create that world. He ought to have created that world so that he can display his love. And at that point, you're just saying that that's the best world then. And then I don't understand how you
can answer both Leo or Pine Creek. I want to respond to what Leo and Pine Creek said. Why didn't God just create that that way now? Why didn't he just make it so we'd never see
Why
that?
not heaven now?
Because
as
I
Trent
think
Horn
there's
calls it.
something important about having the experience, about experiencing it, experiencing
That's just to
things
say you
ourselves.
ought go through the experiences. And if you ought go through the experiences, if that's what ought occur, then I don't
Then it's
understand
not evil.
how it's evil. So this world,
Yes.
again, then there's just no evil in this
Well,
world.
Rebecca, what
Leo,
about
I got
what
you.
about babies
Leo,
who
how
never
do you
had the
know
chance?
It's a
that
good point.
good is
It's a
good?
good
How
point.
do you know that, Leo?
What
That
did you
good is
ask,
good.
Otangelo?
How do you know that good is good?
I just don't understand what you mean when you ask that. I just take good to be that which ought be done, that which ought be permitted, that which we have most reason to do.
Based on a standard, Otangelo.
Yeah, I take a normative view, and at the beginning, Otangelo, it seemed that you agreed with that. That you agreed that what is good is what we ought to do, is what ought to be permitted, what we have most reason to do, and that the evil was not contrapositive. Isn't the word I'm looking for, but the sort of the opposite of that, what we ought not do. And so I'm just saying, any world which God has reason to instantiate is thereby it's the best world. It's the world that ought to have been permitted. I just don't see in what sense you could say that's an evil world.